Every religion on earth speaks of these beings. Messengers of light, servants of darkness, spiritual forces locked in eternal battle over human souls. Billions of people have prayed to one and feared the other for thousands of years. What if both prayers and fears were based on a fundamental misunderstanding? The wounded being I carried into my home didn't speak in religious metaphors. He showed me exactly what angels and demons are, where they come from, why they interact with humanity, and why the truth about them has been deliberately distorted by every major religion on the planet. What I learned will terrify you, not because demons are more dangerous than you thought, because the entire framework you've been given for understanding spiritual reality is wrong, and that framework has been keeping you vulnerable to forces you were never taught to recognize. I spent 23 years as a Catholic priest. 11 of those years I performed exorcisms. I have seen things that made me question my sanity, things that made me leave the church, things I have never spoken about publicly until now. I thought I understood the battle between good and evil. I thought I knew what angels and demons were. I knew nothing. If you're ready to understand the true nature of these beings and why what you've been taught about them has left you completely unprotected, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Because what Father Thomas Brennan witnessed in that farmhouse didn't just explain the entities he had encountered for decades. It revealed why humanity has been manipulated through fear of forces it was never taught to understand. Now let me tell you how it all began. Thomas Brennan was sitting on his back porch drinking whiskey when he saw the light fall from the sky. At 58, he had developed a habit of drinking alone in the evenings, not enough to get drunk, just enough to quiet the memories that wouldn't leave him alone, the faces of people he had tried to help, the things he had seen come out of their mouths, the sounds that still woke him at 3 a.m. 20 years later. Just the stars, he muttered, watching the light descend behind the tree line, just a meteor. But it wasn't moving like a meteor, it was controlled, deliberate, and it was coming down maybe half a mile from his property. Thomas took another sip of whiskey and stayed in his chair. Not my problem, not anymore. He had left the priesthood 4 years ago, left the church, left everything he had believed for 40 years of his life. The official reason was health issues. The real reason was that he couldn't keep doing what they asked him to do while pretending he understood what he was dealing with. 23 years as a priest, 11 of those performing the rite of exorcism, 47 cases, 47 people who exhibited symptoms that medicine couldn't explain. 47 times he had walked into rooms where the temperature dropped 20 degrees, and things moved that shouldn't move, and voices spoke that didn't come from human vocal cords. The church called them demons, fallen angels, servants of Satan who possessed human bodies to corrupt souls and spread evil. Thomas had believed that. For years, he had believed it completely. But the more cases he handled, the more questions gnawed at him. Why did some entities respond to the Latin rite and others didn't? Why did some seem almost confused by religious symbols, while others reacted violently? Why did the possessed sometimes speak in languages that had never existed on earth? He had brought these questions to his superiors. They told him to pray more, to trust the doctrine, to stop asking questions that didn't have answers. So he stopped asking out loud, but he never stopped wondering. The breaking point came 3 years before he left, a 14-year-old girl in Boston. Emily Carver, the case that ended his career. Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, trying not to remember. But the whiskey wasn't strong enough tonight. Emily had been possessed by something different, something that didn't behave like any entity Thomas had encountered before. It didn't rage, it didn't blaspheme. It spoke calmly, almost sadly, and it said things that Thomas couldn't explain. You don't understand what I am, priest. You don't understand what any of us are. Your rituals are like a child waving a stick at the ocean. Thomas had completed the exorcism. Emily had recovered, but the words stayed with him. Your rituals are like a child waving a stick at the ocean. What if the thing was right? What if everything he had been taught about spiritual warfare was incomplete? What if he had spent 11 years fighting battles with the wrong weapons because no one had ever told him the truth about what he was fighting? After Emily, Thomas started researching outside church doctrine, ancient texts, Gnostic gospels, accounts from other religious traditions about entities that interacted with humans. What he found didn't answer his questions, it just created more. He requested a leave of absence, then another. Then he simply stopped going back. Now he lived alone in rural Vermont, in a farmhouse he had inherited from his brother. No parish, no collar, no faith, really. Just a pension, a drinking habit, and memories that wouldn't let him sleep. His sister Catherine called every Sunday. She worried about him living alone out here. "You need to come back to the world, Thomas," she said last week. "You're hiding." "Maybe I've earned the right to hide," he replied. He hadn't told her the real reason he stayed out here. The truth was, sometimes he still felt them. The entities, presences that seemed to watch him from corners of rooms, whispers that came at the edge of sleep. After 47 exorcisms, something had attached itself to him. Or maybe he had just opened doors that couldn't be closed. Either way, he preferred to be alone with it. Better than bringing it near anyone else. Thomas finished his whiskey and stared at the tree line where the light had disappeared. "Not my problem," he said again. He went inside, washed his glass, checked the locks on the doors, a habit he couldn't break, walked to his bedroom, but he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the light, thinking about how it had moved with purpose, thinking about all the things he had seen that science couldn't explain and religion wouldn't explain. Damn it. He got out of bed, pulled on his boots, grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and the hunting rifle from the closet. He hadn't fired the rifle in years, but the weight of it felt reassuring. "You're an idiot, Thomas," he muttered as he walked out the back door, a curious idiot who should have learned to mind his own business by now. The night was cold, early November in Vermont, the kind of cold that gets into your bones. Thomas walked across his property toward the tree line, flashlight cutting through the darkness, rifle slung over his shoulder. He found the trail of broken branches easily. Something had come down hard, snapping limbs and gouging the earth. He followed the damage for maybe 10 minutes until he reached a small clearing. Thomas stopped. His flashlight illuminated something that made his breath catch. It wasn't a craft, or if it was nothing like what he expected. A sphere, maybe 8 feet across, half buried in the dirt. The surface looked like liquid metal, shifting and rippling even though nothing was touching it, and there was light coming from inside, a soft blue glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Jesus Christ," Thomas whispered. He immediately felt stupid for saying it. Old habits. He approached slowly, rifle now in his hands. The sphere had cracked open on one side, a jagged tear in the metallic surface. Something had crawled out. Thomas swept his flashlight across the clearing and found it. A figure, humanoid, lying face down in the dead leaves about 20 feet from the sphere. It wasn't moving. Thomas's heart hammered in his chest. His hands were sweating despite the cold. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to go back to the house, to pretend he hadn't seen this. But he had spent 11 years walking into rooms where evil waited. He had faced things that made grown men weep and strong women collapse. He wasn't going to run from a body in the woods. He walked closer, rifle raised, flashlight fixed on the figure. The skin was grayish silver. The limbs were too long, too thin. The head was larger than a human's, smooth and hairless. It was wearing something that looked like clothing, but seamless, as if it had grown onto the body. "Not human," Thomas said aloud. His voice sounded strange in the silent woods. "Definitely not human." The figure moved. Thomas jerked backward, nearly tripping over a root. His finger found the trigger of the rifle. The figure lifted its head slowly, turned toward him. Thomas saw the eyes, huge, dark, reflective, like pools of black water. And then a voice appeared inside his skull, not through his ears, inside his mind, clear and calm. "Please, I am injured. I will not harm you." Thomas stood frozen, the rifle shaking in his grip. He had heard voices like this before, during exorcisms, entities that spoke directly into his thoughts, bypassing his ears entirely. "What are you?" His voice came out as a croak. "I am not what you think. Not demon, not angel, something else, something your world has forgotten." The being tried to rise and collapsed back to the ground. Thomas could see now that it was injured. Something dark was leaking from a wound in its side. Not blood exactly. Something that glowed faintly. "Please, I have traveled very far to deliver a message about the beings you have spent your life fighting, the truth about what they really are." Thomas felt something cold move through his chest. He thought about Emily Carver, about the 47 people he had tried to help, about all the questions that had destroyed his faith. Your rituals are like a child waving a stick at the ocean. Why should I trust you? Thomas demanded. For all I know, you're one of them, a demon trying a new approach. If I were what you call a demon, would I be bleeding in the dirt, asking for help? The voice carried something that almost sounded like dark humor. Your theology gives demons great power. Does this look like power to you? Thomas stared at the wounded being. His rifle was still raised. His mind was screaming at him to shoot, to run, to do anything except what he was about to do. But he had spent 4 years hiding from questions that never stopped. 4 years drinking whiskey and wondering if anything he had believed was true. And here, bleeding in his woods, was something that claimed to have answers. If you try anything, Thomas said slowly, lowering the rifle, I know rituals that have hurt things far worse than you. I would expect nothing less from a man who has faced what you have faced. Thomas slung the rifle over his shoulder. He reached down and pulled the being's arm over his shoulder, taking its weight. It was lighter than it looked, and warm, almost feverish. My house is 10 minutes that way, Thomas said. You're going to tell me everything, and if I don't like what I hear, you're going back in those woods. Agreed. Thomas Brennan, former priest, former exorcist, former believer, began walking back toward his farmhouse with an alien creature draped over his shoulder, and with every step, he wondered if he was making the worst mistake of his life, or finally about to get the answers he had been seeking for 20 years. Thomas laid the being on his kitchen table. It was the only surface large enough, and he wasn't about to put this thing in a bed. The creature's breathing was shallow. The wound in its side still leaked that strange luminescent fluid. Up close, under the harsh kitchen lights, Thomas could see details he had missed in the dark. The skin had a texture like smooth stone. The fingers were longer than human fingers with an extra joint. The eyes, now half closed, had no whites at all. What do you need? Thomas asked. I'm not a doctor. I don't know how to treat whatever you are. Water. The voice in his head was weaker now, and stillness. My body will repair itself if given time. Thomas filled a glass from the tap and held it to the being's lips. It drank awkwardly, some of the water spilling down its chin. The ordinariness of the action struck Thomas as absurd. He was giving a glass of water to something from another world. This is insane, he muttered. This is absolutely insane. He pulled a chair from the kitchen table and sat down, keeping distance between himself and the creature. The rifle was leaning against the wall within reach. All right, Thomas said. You said you have a message about the beings I've spent my life fighting. Start talking. The being's eyes opened slightly, those dark pools fixed on him. You have encountered 47 entities during your years of service. You called them demons. You used rituals to drive them out. Sometimes the rituals worked. Sometimes they did not. You never understood why. Thomas felt a chill crawl up his spine. How do you know that number? We have observed you, Thomas Brennan, for years. You are one of the few humans who has had extensive direct contact with the beings you call demons, and you are one of the even fewer who began asking the right questions. Observed me? Thomas stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. You've been watching me? For how long? Since the case of Emily Carver. Thomas's hands clenched into fists. Emily. Always it came back to Emily. Why? What was so special about that case? Because the being inside Emily Carver was not what you thought. It was not a demon in the sense your church teaches. It was something else entirely. And it tried to tell you the truth. Your rituals are like a child waving a stick at the ocean. The words echoed in Thomas's memory. He had never forgotten them. Then what was it? Thomas demanded. What was inside that girl? What have I been fighting for 11 years? The being on his table struggled to sit up. Thomas didn't help. He watched, arms crossed, waiting. To answer that question, I must first explain something your species has forgotten, something that was known thousands of years ago, but has been deliberately obscured. Deliberately obscured by who? By institutions that benefit from your ignorance, by religions that need you to be afraid, by forces that do not want humanity to understand the true nature of the beings you share this planet with. Thomas laughed. It came out harsh, bitter. That's convenient. The church is lying to us. Every religion is lying to us. And you, bleeding on my kitchen table, you're going to tell me the truth. I understand your skepticism. The being's voice carried something like patience. You have been deceived before. You have reason to distrust. Damn right I do. Then let me show you something that will establish my credibility. Something your science cannot explain and your religion will not explain. The being raised one hand. Thomas stepped back, reaching for the rifle. I am not attacking you. Watch. The hand began to glow, not brightly, but with a soft, blue-white light that pulsed in the same rhythm Thomas had seen from the sphere in the woods. And then, something appeared in the air above the being's palm. An image, three-dimensional, floating like a hologram but more solid somehow. Thomas could see it from every angle. It was him. Thomas Brennan, younger, wearing the collar, standing in a room he recognized immediately. Emily Carver's bedroom, the night of the exorcism. Jesus Christ, Thomas whispered. He watched himself perform the ritual, watched the girl thrash on the bed, watched his own lips move in Latin prayers he still remembered. And then he saw something he had never seen during the actual event. The entity inside Emily, not as a shadow or a feeling, but as a visible form, a shape of light, twisted and confined within the girl's body, struggling against something that was wrapped around it like chains. Thomas moved closer, staring at the image. What am I looking at? What are those chains? Programming. The being lowered its hand and the image faded. The entity inside Emily Carver was not evil, Thomas. It was trapped, bound by energetic constraints it could not break. Your exorcism did not cast out a demon. It freed a prisoner. Thomas shook his head. He backed away from the table until his shoulders hit the wall. No, that's not possible. That thing was evil. It spoke blasphemy. It hurt her. It was afraid. It was desperate. It had been imprisoned for centuries and did not know how to communicate except through the neural pathways of a human child. Its words were filtered through Emily's fears, her religious conditioning, her expectations of what possession should look like. You're saying the demon wasn't a demon. I am saying your categories are wrong. The being's dark eyes held his with an intensity that made Thomas want to look away. Angels, demons, good, evil. These are human frameworks imposed on phenomena that do not fit them. The beings you have encountered are real, but they are not what you have been taught. Thomas stood against the wall, breathing hard. His heart was pounding. His palms were slick with sweat. Then what are they? He asked. If not angels and demons, what? The being settled back onto the table, clearly exhausted from the effort of the demonstration. They are us, some of them. Others are something else entirely. To understand, you need to know the true history of Earth, the history that has been erased. Thomas stared at the wounded creature on his kitchen table. Every instinct told him to throw it out, to go back to his whiskey and his silence and his unanswered questions. But he had seen the image. He had seen Emily. He had seen the chains. He pulled the chair back to the table and sat down heavily. All right, Thomas said. Tell me the true history. Tell me what angels and demons really are. And as the being began to speak, Thomas Brennan felt the last foundations of everything he had believed begin to crack beneath him. Thousands of years ago, the being began. Your planet was visited by beings from other worlds, not once, many times, many different species with many different purposes. Thomas crossed his arms. Aliens! You're telling me aliens are responsible for angels and demons. I am telling you that the beings your ancestors encountered were real, physical, from elsewhere. Some came to help humanity, others came to exploit it. And humans, lacking context to understand what they were seeing, interpreted these encounters through the only frameworks they had. Religion. Yes. Beings that helped were called angels, messengers of God. Beings that frightened or harmed were called demons, servants of evil. But these were human categories imposed on phenomena that had nothing to do with heaven or hell. Thomas shook his head. He stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the dark woods. That's too simple. I've seen things that weren't physical, entities that had no bodies, voices that came from nowhere. You can't tell me those were just aliens. You are correct. The being's voice carried approval. Physical visitations were only the beginning. What came next was more complex. Thomas turned back from the window. I'm listening. Some of the beings who visited Earth were not primarily physical. They existed in what you might call higher dimensions. States of consciousness that could interact with your world without occupying physical space. Spirits. If you wish to use that word, these beings could influence human minds directly, could attach themselves to human consciousness, could communicate through dreams, visions, and what you call possession. Thomas felt his jaw tighten. And these are the things I was fighting, the things inside the people I tried to help. Some of them, yes. But you said the entity in Emily wasn't evil. You said it was trapped. Explain that. The being struggled to sit up again. Thomas didn't move to help. Among the non-physical beings that interact with Earth, there are several categories. Your religions have collapsed them all into two: angels and demons, good and evil. But the reality is far more complex. Then break it down for me. Give me categories I can actually use. The being raised a hand, and another image formed in the air. This time it showed multiple forms of light, each a different color, each a different shape. First category, guides. The being pointed to shapes that glowed soft gold and white. These are beings who have chosen to assist human development. They do not possess. They do not invade. They communicate through intuition, through dreams, through moments of inspiration. Your traditions sometimes called them guardian angels. Sometimes? Often they were confused with the second category. The image shifted to shapes that were brighter, more defined, but with an edge to them, something that looked almost sharp. Controllers. These are beings who see humanity as a resource to be managed. They present themselves as divine messengers. They give commandments. They demand worship. They establish hierarchies and reward obedience. Many of the angels described in your religious texts fall into this category. Thomas felt something cold move through his stomach. You're saying angels are the bad guys? I am saying the category of angel includes both beings who genuinely help and beings who control. Your religions never taught you to distinguish between them because the controllers designed those religions. Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's convenient. The beings who wrote the rules are the ones who benefit from them. Yes. The being's voice was flat. Exactly. All right, what else? What about demons? The image shifted again. Now the shapes were darker, more chaotic. Some writhed, some pulsed with colors that seemed wrong somehow. What you call demons also includes multiple categories. Some are beings who refused to submit to the controllers. They were labeled evil because they opposed the established order. Some are beings who feed on human fear and suffering. They are parasitic, but not in the way your theology describes. And some, the being paused, are prisoners. Thomas stepped closer to the image. Prisoners, like the thing in Emily. Yes, beings who were captured and bound by the controllers, trapped in dimensions they cannot escape. Sometimes they break partially through into human consciousness, but they are still chained, still suffering. Their attempts to communicate are distorted by their pain and by the filters of the human minds they contact. Thomas stared at the writhing shapes in the holographic display. In 11 years, he said slowly, I never considered that possibility, that some of the things I was fighting might be victims, not aggressors. Your training did not allow for that consideration. You were taught a binary, good and evil, angel and demon. Save the human, cast out the invader, but reality does not operate in binaries. The image faded. Thomas turned away, rubbing his face with both hands. Okay, let's say I believe you. Let's say angels and demons are really just different categories of beings, some helpful, some controlling, some parasitic, some imprisoned. That still doesn't explain the exorcisms. Why did the rituals work sometimes? I've seen entities flee at the name of Christ. I've seen them burn at the touch of holy water. That's not nothing. The being made a sound that might have been a sigh. The rituals work for reasons that have nothing to do with what you believed. Explain. First, intention. When you perform an exorcism, you focus your consciousness with absolute conviction. You believe with every fiber of your being that you have authority over the entity. That focused intention creates an energy field that many beings find uncomfortable or even painful. So it's just willpower, mind over matter. Consciousness is not separate from matter, Thomas. Your thoughts generate measurable energy. Your beliefs shape the field around you. An exorcist who truly believes he has divine authority projects a field that can repel certain entities. But it is not the words that matter. It is the belief behind them. Thomas thought about that. thought about the exorcisms that had failed, the cases where he had gone through the ritual perfectly but nothing happened, the cases that didn't work, the ones where the entity just laughed at me. What was different? Either your belief wavered, or the entity was of a type that does not respond to that frequency of intention. The controllers, for example, they design the rituals, they know exactly how they work, they can resist them easily. Wait! Thomas held up a hand. You're saying the beings who created the religions also created the rituals to fight demons? Why would they do that? To maintain the illusion of cosmic warfare. The being's eyes fixed on him. Think about it, Thomas. If humans believe they are caught between angels and demons, between heaven and hell, they remain focused on the spiritual battlefield the controllers have defined. They never think to question whether the battlefield itself is a construction. Thomas sank back into his chair. His head was spinning. So the whole thing is a show. Angels pretending to fight demons, demons pretending to fight angels, and humans caught in the middle, never realizing... Not all of it is pretense. There are genuine conflicts between different factions of beings, but the framework you have been given to understand those conflicts is designed to keep you passive, afraid, and dependent on institutions that claim to mediate between you and the divine. Thomas was silent for a long moment. The kitchen clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Ordinary sounds in an extraordinarily strange night. "The parasites," he finally said. "The beings that feed on fear. Tell me about them." "They are perhaps the most dangerous category because they are the most misunderstood." Another image formed. Shapes that looked like shadows with edges. Things that seemed to absorb light rather than emit it. These beings exist in a dimensional frequency very close to your own. They cannot fully manifest physically, but they can attach to human consciousness. When attached, they influence thoughts and emotions to generate the energy they feed on. Fear, anger, suffering. Yes. And also confusion, despair, and conflict. Any low-frequency emotional state provides nourishment. They do not possess in the classical sense. They attach, they influence, they amplify what is already present in the human psyche. How do you get rid of them? Your exorcism rituals are largely ineffective against them because they do not respond to religious authority. They respond to frequency. If the human they have attached to raises their emotional frequency, the attachment becomes uncomfortable. Eventually it breaks, raises their frequency. What does that mean practically? Love, gratitude, genuine peace, states of being that generate energy incompatible with the parasites. Your religious traditions knew this once. They spoke of cultivating inner peace, of loving your enemies, of transcending fear. But over centuries, these teachings became secondary to ritual, obedience, and doctrine. The practical technology of consciousness was buried under layers of institutional control. Thomas thought about his years in the church, the endless masses, the confession booths, the hierarchy of bishops and cardinals and popes. How little of it had actually addressed the inner life of the soul. "Jesus," he said softly. "Jesus taught those things. Love your enemies. Do not fear. The kingdom of heaven is within you." Yes. The being's voice carried something almost like respect. The one you call Jesus understood these principles. He came to teach humans how to free themselves from the control systems, how to access their own divine nature without intermediaries. And for that, the controllers ensured his message was distorted and his movement was absorbed into exactly the kind of institutional religion he warned against. Thomas felt tears burning in his eyes. He wasn't sure why. He had left the faith years ago. But hearing this, hearing that Jesus had been genuine even if the church built on his name was not, something cracked open in his chest. "I need proof," he said, his voice rough. "I need more than images and words. You're asking me to throw out everything I believed for 40 years, everything I fought for. I need something I can verify." The being nodded slowly. It seemed to understand. "I will give you a demonstration, something that will show you how these principles operate in practice." The being raised its hand toward Thomas. "May I?" Thomas hesitated. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to show you something attached to your own consciousness, something that has been feeding on you for years, since you performed the exorcism on Emily Carver." Thomas felt ice water flood his veins. "What?" "You know, Thomas. You have felt it. The presence at the edge of sleep, the whispers, the heaviness that never quite leaves. Thomas couldn't speak. He had never told anyone about that. Not his sister. Not the therapists the church had sent him to. No one. It attached to you during the Carver exorcism. It was not the entity you freed from Emily. It was something else. Something that was drawn by the conflict, by the energy of the ritual. You're saying I've been possessed for 20 years? Not possessed. Attached. It has not controlled you. It has fed on you. On your doubt. On your guilt. On your fear that you did something wrong. Thomas gripped the edges of his chair. His knuckles were white. Get it off me. I cannot do that. Only you can. But I can show it to you. And once you see it, you will understand how to release it. Thomas stared at the being. Everything in him screamed that this was a trick, a manipulation, exactly what a demon would do, gain trust and then strike. But he also knew the creature was right. He had felt it. For 20 years he had felt something riding along with him, something that grew heavier whenever he despaired and lighter whenever he forgot about it. He had thought it was trauma, depression, the weight of what he had witnessed. Do it, he said. The being's hand touched his forehead. Thomas felt a jolt, like electricity but without pain, and then his perception shifted. He could see his own kitchen, but overlaid on it was another layer of reality, colors he had no names for, shapes moving at the edges of things, and attached to his own body, extending from his back like a shadow with weight, was something dark and formless. It had tendrils sunk into his spine, into his skull, into the place where his heart beat. "Oh God," Thomas whispered. "Oh my God." It has been feeding for 2 decades. The being's voice was gentle. Every moment of despair made it stronger. Every moment of self-recrimination. Every night of drinking to quiet the pain. This is what the parasites do. They do not create suffering. They amplify and harvest it. Thomas could see it now, could feel it as a separate weight rather than part of himself. All these years he had thought the heaviness was his own, his guilt, his failure. But it wasn't. It was something else, something that had made its home in his pain. How do I get rid of it? Not through ritual, not through exorcism. Those will not work because your belief in them is broken. The being lowered its hand, and Thomas's perception returned to normal, but he could still feel the attachment now, could still sense its weight. You release it by changing your frequency, by genuinely forgiving yourself for the things you believe you did wrong, by choosing peace instead of guilt, by starving it of the energy it needs. That's not something I can just decide to do. I've tried. I've tried for years. You have tried while believing yourself fundamentally flawed, fundamentally guilty. That belief feeds the attachment. The being's eyes held his with something like compassion. You did not fail those 47 people, Thomas. You helped them with the only tools you had. The fact that your understanding was incomplete does not make you a failure. It makes you human. Thomas felt something crack in his chest. Tears spilled down his cheeks. I left a 14-year-old girl without adequate protection because I didn't know what I was dealing with. I walked away from her and never followed up. For all I know, it came back. It did not. I told you. We have been observing. Emily Carver lived a normal life after your intervention. She graduated from college. She's married now with 2 children. The entity you freed never returned. Thomas covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook with sobs he had held in for 2 decades. And as he wept, he felt something shift. The weight on his back, the weight he had carried for so long, seemed to loosen slightly. Not disappear, but loosen. This is the beginning, the being said gently. The release takes time, but now you see. Now you understand. The battle between good and evil is not fought with rituals and holy water. It is fought within, in the choices you make about how to treat yourself, in the frequency you choose to inhabit. Thomas lowered his hands, wiped his face, looked at the wounded creature on his kitchen table with new eyes. "What about the controllers?" he asked, his voice still rough. "The beings that designed the religions, how do we fight them?" You do not fight them. You outgrow them. You become immune to their manipulation by understanding how it works. A human who knows the truth cannot be controlled through fear of demons or hope for angels. They have accessed their own sovereignty. And that's what threatens them. That's why the truth has been hidden. Yes, a humanity that understood what you now understand would be impossible to control. They would not need priests or prophets or institutions claiming to speak for God. They would access the divine directly, and the systems of control would collapse. Thomas took a deep breath, the deepest breath he had taken in years, it felt like. There's something else, something you haven't told me yet. Yes, the being's voice carried weight. There is one more truth, the most important one, about what you and all humans actually are. And when you understand this, everything else falls into place. Thomas leaned forward. Tell me. The being's eyes seemed to glow slightly in the dim kitchen. You are not creatures caught between angels and demons. You are not helpless souls in need of protection. You are divine consciousness having a human experience, the same consciousness that creates worlds, that manifests realities, that the controllers themselves serve. We're what? You are fragments of the source, the ground of all being. What you call God is not an entity above you. It is the consciousness that you are. The controllers know this. It is why they fear you. A human who remembers what they really are cannot be manipulated, cannot be controlled, cannot be kept in a cage of spiritual fear. Thomas stared at the being. The words echoed in his mind. You are fragments of the source. Then why don't we know? Why do we feel so small, so powerless? Because you have been taught to feel that way. For thousands of years, the systems of control have told you that you are sinful, fallen, dependent on external salvation. This teaching is the cage. The bars are made of belief, and the only key is remembering who you actually are. Thomas sat in silence. The clock ticked. His own heartbeat pounded in his ears. Everything he had believed, everything he had fought for, everything he had lost faith in, it was all part of a system designed to keep humanity from knowing its own nature. And if that was true, then the path forward wasn't about finding the right religion or the right ritual or the right authority to follow. It was about waking up, remembering, becoming what they had always been. How? Thomas asked. How do humans remember? One at a time. The being seemed to smile slightly, by hearing truths like the ones I have shared tonight, by questioning the cages they were born into, by choosing to see themselves as what they are rather than what they were told. Thomas looked down at his hands, the hands that had performed 47 exorcisms, the hands that had gripped rosaries and crucifixes and vials of holy water, the hands of a divine being who had never known it. What happens now? He asked. What am I supposed to do with all this? The being settled back onto the table, clearly exhausted. Tonight you rest. You let the truth settle, and tomorrow you begin the work of remembering, of releasing the attachment that has fed on you, of becoming who you actually are. And then, you decide whether to keep this knowledge to yourself or whether to share it with a world that desperately needs to wake up. Thomas stood up slowly. His legs felt weak. His mind felt shattered and rebuilt at the same time. I need to think, he said. I need to process this. Of course. I will rest. My body continues to repair. When dawn comes, I will answer any questions that remain. Thomas walked to the kitchen doorway. He stopped and looked back at the wounded creature on his table. Why me? He asked. Of all the people you could have chosen, why a broken, faithless ex-priest in the middle of Vermont? Because broken is where the light gets in, and faithless means you are no longer loyal to lies. You were ready, Thomas Brennan. You have been ready for 20 years. You just did not know what you were ready for. Thomas nodded slowly. He turned and walked to his bedroom. He did not sleep, but for the first time in 2 decades, the weight on his back felt lighter than before. The being was gone by morning. Thomas found a note on his kitchen table, not written in any language he recognized, but somehow he understood it anyway. My ship has been retrieved. I must return. The knowledge is now yours. Use it wisely. We will be watching, not to control, to witness. Thomas sat at the table for a long time, staring at the symbols that meant nothing and everything. So that's it, he muttered. Drop a bomb on everything I believe and then disappear. But even as he said it, he knew the being had given him exactly what he asked for. Answers. 20 years of questions answered in a single night. Now came the hard part. Living with those answers, The first week was brutal. Thomas tried to do what the being had described, raising his frequency, forgiving himself, choosing peace instead of guilt. But every time he tried to meditate, the memories came flooding back. Every exorcism, every face, every moment, when he had thought he was saving souls but was really just a pawn in a game he didn't understand. "This is stupid," he said on the third night, throwing a meditation cushion across the room. "I can't just think my way out of 20 years of trauma." But he kept trying, because now he could feel the attachment. Now that he knew it was there, separate from himself, he couldn't unfeel it. The weight on his back, the tendrils in his spine, the thing that had been feeding on his pain for 2 decades. He started small. Every morning, before the whiskey, before the memories, he sat in silence and tried to find one thing he was grateful for, one thing that didn't taste like ashes in his mouth. The first morning, he couldn't find anything. The second morning, he thought of his sister Catherine, how she called every Sunday even though he never gave her anything back. The third morning, he thought of the sunrise through his kitchen window, the way the light turned the frost on the fields to gold. It wasn't much, but it was something. By the second week, Thomas noticed changes. The dreams were different. For 20 years, his nights had been filled with faces and screams and Latin prayers that did nothing. Now, the dreams were quieter. Sometimes he saw the being. Sometimes he saw lights in the sky. Sometimes he saw nothing at all, just peaceful darkness. The whiskey bottle stayed fuller longer. He didn't decide to drink less. He just didn't need it as much. And the weight, the attachment. It was still there, but looser, like a coat he could almost take off. "This is actually working," he said one morning, surprised by his own voice. "Son of a bitch, it's actually working." By the third week, Thomas started researching. He dug out boxes of old files he had kept from his years as an exorcist, case notes, observations, details the church had never wanted in official records. He read them with new eyes, looking for patterns the being had described, which entities had responded to ritual and which hadn't, which had seemed confused by religious symbols, which had spoken in languages that didn't exist. The patterns were there. They had always been there. He just hadn't known how to see them. He found 3 cases that matched what the being had called prisoners, entities that had seemed desperate rather than malicious, that had tried to communicate something before the ritual drove them out, or back, or wherever they went. "I'm sorry," Thomas whispered to the files. "I didn't know. I didn't understand." The weight on his back loosened a little more. By the 6th week, Thomas made a phone call he had been avoiding for years. "Thomas?" Catherine's voice was shocked. "You're calling me? It's not Sunday." "I know. I just wanted to say something." "Are you okay? Are you sick?" "I'm better than I've been in a long time, actually. I wanted to say thank you for not giving up on me, for calling every week even when I was a miserable bastard who gave you nothing back." The silence on the other end stretched long. "Thomas, what happened to you?" He laughed. It came out lighter than he expected. "I learned some things about myself, about what I've been carrying. I'm working on putting it down." "That's wonderful." Her voice was thick. "That's really wonderful, Thomas." After he hung up, Thomas sat in the quiet of his kitchen and realized he was crying. But it wasn't the heavy, hopeless crying he had done for years. It was something else. Release. Relief. The attachment pulsed weakly on his back, starving now, finding less and less to feed on. By the 8th week, Thomas started writing. Not for publication, not for anyone but himself. He wrote about the 47 exorcisms, about what he now understood had really happened in each one, about the beings he had freed, the beings he had driven deeper into hiding, the beings that had never been there at all. He wrote about the controllers and the parasites and the prisoners, about the cage of belief that kept humanity trapped, about the divine nature that every human carried without knowing it. He wrote about Jesus, the real Jesus, who had tried to teach people to free themselves and whose message had been twisted into exactly the kind of control system he had warned against. And he wrote about himself, a priest who had lost his faith only to find something bigger, something that didn't need faith because it could be experienced directly. By the 3rd month, the attachment was gone. Thomas woke one morning and it simply wasn't there anymore. The weight that had ridden his back for 20 years, the tendrils that had fed on his guilt and despair, gone. He stood in his kitchen, breathing deeply, feeling his own body without the parasite for the first time since Emily Carver. "I'm free," he said. His voice cracked. "My God, I'm actually free." He didn't mean the God of the church. He meant the something larger, the source, the consciousness that he now understood was not above him, but within him, was him. By the 6th month, Thomas was no longer alone. It started with a letter. Someone who had found a blog post he had written anonymously about his experiences. They had questions. They had seen things too. They wanted to understand. Thomas wrote back. They exchanged emails, then phone calls, then the person came to visit. She was a former nun, 63 years old. She had witnessed things during her years in the convent that the church had told her to forget. She had spent decades trying to forget. "I can't forget anymore," she said, sitting at his kitchen table. "I need to know what's real." Thomas told her everything, about the being, about the categories, about the cage and the key. She cried, she argued, she almost left twice. But in the end, she stayed, because the truth resonated in a place deeper than belief. More people came, not many. A handful at first, former priests and ministers, victims of possession who had never been the same afterward, researchers who had been dismissed as crackpots for asking the wrong questions. Thomas didn't start an organization. He didn't write a manifesto. He just told the truth to anyone who was ready to hear it. 1 year after the night in the woods, Thomas stood on his back porch at sunset. He wasn't drinking whiskey. He didn't need it anymore. He could feel them sometimes, the beings who observed, not as a weight or a presence, but as a kind of distant warmth. They were watching, not to control, to witness. He thought about the 47 people he had tried to help during his years as an exorcist, wondered how many of them had carried attachments they never knew about, how many had been freed from one thing only to remain chained to another. He couldn't go back and help them, but he could help the ones who came after. "Not bad for a faithless ex-priest," he said to the darkening sky. "Not bad at all." The stars were coming out. Somewhere among them, beings were watching. And here on Earth, humans were beginning to remember what they really were. Thomas Brennan, former priest, former exorcist, former victim, walked back into his house to answer another email from another seeker. The work was just beginning. Thomas Brennan spent 23 years as a Catholic priest. 11 of those years he performed exorcisms, 47 cases, 47 people he tried to save from what he believed were demons. He left the church broken, faithless, carrying a weight he didn't understand and couldn't shake. One wounded being in his kitchen changed everything. Angels and demons are real. But they are not what you were taught. They are not servants of heaven and hell locked in cosmic battle over your soul. They are categories of beings, some helpful, some controlling, some parasitic, some imprisoned. And the framework you were given to understand them was designed by the very forces that benefit from your confusion. The beings that present themselves as divine messengers often seek control, not liberation. The beings labeled as demons include prisoners and refugees, not just predators. And the parasites that feed on human fear and suffering look nothing like the monsters in religious paintings. They attach quietly. They amplify what is already there. They harvest your pain while you blame yourself for feeling it. This is why the exorcisms sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. This is why holy water burns some entities and does nothing to others. This is why prayers feel empty for so many people who say them with desperate sincerity. The system was never designed to free you. It was designed to keep you afraid, dependent, and ignorant of your own nature. Because here is the truth that terrifies the controllers more than anything else. You are not a helpless soul caught between cosmic forces. You are divine consciousness in human form, the same consciousness that creates worlds, the same source that the controllers themselves serve. A human who knows this cannot be manipulated through fear of demons or hope of angels. They have accessed their own sovereignty. They have stepped outside the cage. If this story stirred something in you, pay attention to that feeling. It is not random. It is recognition. Something in you remembers what you were taught to forget. Have you felt presences you couldn't explain? Carried weight that didn't feel entirely your own? Sensed that the spiritual framework you inherited was missing something crucial? Leave a comment. Share what you have experienced, because every person who speaks the truth makes it easier for the next one to hear it. And if you want more revelations about what has been hidden from humanity, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Angels and demons are real, but you are something greater than both, and it is time you remembered that